But these are remarkable times that we are in the midst of. The actions by North Carolina leaders of recent days have made our state a national, even international laughingstock and pariah. And not only did lawmakers and Governor McCrory affirmatively repeal the city of Charlotte's modest attempt to codify some simple rules of human decency and non-discrimination, they rolled back several decades worth of fundamental anti-discrimination law and undercut basic efforts to help struggling low-wage workers. As Chris noted last week in a column he wrote on the kangaroo session that the legislature held last week, the House's defeat of an amendment to extend basic protections in public accommodations to LGBT North Carolinians really spoke volumes. Chris said, the majority of the state House affirmatively decided that it is okay for companies to fire people who are gay simply because they are gay in Charlotte and everywhere else in North Carolina. They voted to allow hotels to refuse rooms to same-sex couples and let taxis refuse rides to transgender men and women. The majority of the House voted to give restaurants permission to refuse to serve a gay man and allow theaters to refuse to seat him based on his sexual orientation. So where do things stand now, and where do we go from here? Today, we're going to tackle these questions with a very distinguished panel of speakers, headlined by Charlotte Mayor Jennifer Roberts. As you may know, Mayor Roberts has been a champion of non-discrimination since her election last year. She was raised in Charlotte, and now she and her husband Manley are also raising their 2 children there as well. During her professional career, she has worked as a diplomat for the U.S. Department of State, serving in the Dominican Republic as a consular officer and then as a political officer on the Mexico desk. During her years in Charlotte, Mayor Roberts has been director of the Mayor's International Cabinet, a lending officer in the International Corporate Banking at First Union, an executive director at the Charlotte World Affairs Council. She has also served on the Mecklenburg County Commission as a member and chairperson. But before we hear from the mayor, we're going to have a very brief summary of what the new law really says from my boss, the executive director of the North Carolina Justice Center, Rick Glazier. And as most of you know, Rick spent 13 years representing Cumberland County in the North Carolina House of Representatives and was throughout that time one of the most dedicated, passionate, and gifted spokespersons for justice and equality in our state. After Mayor Roberts, who will follow Rick, we're going to hear from Chris Brook. Chris is the legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union of North Carolina, where he oversees the organization's legal program and its work on a wide range of constitutional law issues, including LGBT rights, racial justice, and religious liberty. And he's here to discuss the lawsuit that his organization filed at 2 o'clock yesterday morning, along with Lambda Legal in Equality, North Carolina. He'll be joined by Joaquin Carcano, and Joaquin is a UNC Chapel Hill employee in the I'm going to pronounce this right, Enlaces por la Salud, which is Links for Health program at UNC Chapel Hill, and the named plaintiff in the lawsuit. And finally, we'll hear from Tim Gaudette. Tim is the outreach manager in a national organization known as the Small Business Majority, a business-run group that helps debunk right-wing mythology and stereotypes regarding the needs of Americans and opinions of American small business. And he flew in from Colorado to be with us today. So as you can see, it's a full panel, a great panel, and we're going to start it off with Rick Glazier. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody, for being here today at this most crucial of crucial conversations. And I'm going to try to stay to my script, but first to thank you for your support and for your work and for what's going to be a long journey to overturn what was done last week in North Carolina. I thought I would do this by talking about and asking 18 questions and answering them very quickly, because that's what the governor did the other day. Only my 18 questions will actually deal with the real bill passed, not the one he wished had passed. And I think it's probably useful to say that 18 is an important number. In my religion, 18 is the number we use that stands for the joy of life. How ironic. So we'll start with our 18 questions today. First, does House Bill 2 eliminate all state laws prohibiting termination of employment on the basis of a color of a person's skin? Yes. The last sentence of Section 143, 422.3 does so explicitly, and Representative Bishop was forced to admit that in committee and on the floor of the House. 48 other states offer this protection. Now only Mississippi and North Carolina will not. Number two, does House Bill 2 eliminate existing state law prohibiting the termination of employment on the basis of national origin or ethnicity? Yes. Number 3, does House Bill 2 eliminate any state law protection for a Christian terminated from their job on the basis of their religion? Yes. 143-422-2 specifically in this provision says, and I'm going to quote it, that the General Assembly declares that the regulation of discriminatory practices in employment is an issue of general and statewide concern and preempts and supersedes any ordinance, regulation, resolution, or policy adopted or imposed by a unit of local government or the political subdivision of that state that regulates any requirement on an employer pertaining to the discriminatory practices in employment. Interesting provision, because the next provision then goes on and states that nothing in this section shall be construed to create or support any statutory or common law private right of action, nor may any person bring any civil action based on the public policy expressed above. So we have essentially the last sentence, which renders the first sentence impotent. A right you cannot enforce is not a right, it's a platitude. In this case, we recognize the right of the man effectively in uniform, but fail to so much as give him a salute. Number 4, does House Bill 2 eliminate all existing state law protections for women from being demoted, transferred, or terminated from their job because of their sex? Yes. Number 5, did North Carolina before House Bill 2 provide any protection from discrimination in employment or access to public accommodations for LGBT citizens? No, and that's a shame. But local governments could and did. Witness the Charlotte Ordinance. Number 6, has House Bill number 2 overturned all existing local ordinances and protections for LGBT citizens in North Carolina and banned any community from ever enacting any such protections again? Yes. And the statute specifically says that. Number 7, does House Bill 2 overturn and eliminate all existing local authority to enact minimum wage standards in their community? Yes, and Section 2.1 of the bill expressly states so. Number 8, does House Bill 2 overturn and eliminate all existing local ordinances and any ability to enact family leave policies, child welfare protections, limits on the number of consecutive hours an employee may be required to work without a break, or health insurance standards for any contractors in their community? Yes, and the statute specifically says that now. Number 9, does House Bill 2 now require school systems to enact regulations on single-sex, multiple occupancy bathrooms and changing facilities in direct violation of the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights guidance? Yes, which is precisely why the Republican governor of South Dakota vetoed similar legislation in South Dakota just several weeks ago. Number 10, does House Bill 2 now require in multiple occupancy public bathrooms that transgender males who were born female but now exhibit fully male characteristics and who have not or cannot change their birth certificate have to use female restrooms? Yes, and in doing so seems to be clear in violation of Title IX. Number 11, was there ever any credible evidence to support the theory that the Charlotte Ordinance created a security risk to any person in bathrooms or locker rooms? No, and not a single credible incident or report exists from the 17 states or the over 200 communities that have enacted and implemented the exact same ordinance as Charlotte included, and this includes the following liberal bastions of policy in the United States: Oklahoma City, Boise, Dallas, Orlando, Indianapolis, Lexington, El Paso, Myrtle Beach, Kansas City, Lawrence, Kansas, just to name a few. Number 12, was the process used to create the Charlotte Ordinance less or more open to public comment and consideration than the legislative process used to create House Bill 2? Well, on the one hand, Charlotte took over a year to develop their ordinance, had a record of 214 pages handed to their council people, 28 exhibits attached, sent it to the council weeks before the vote, had multiple hours of public comment, had public notice weeks before the public hearing, and had a draft available for everybody who wanted to review. On the other hand, the bill of House Bill 2 was developed in secret by a few folks, made public the morning of the vote, had the committee hearing announced on the floor of the House to follow 10 minutes later in the House, had 45 minutes of public comment, most of whom the people who signed up could not speak, was sent to the floor immediately after with no public vetting. The Senate proceeded within hours, and it was signed by the governor that night. 12 hours from origination to ratification, a record. If you had no dog in this fight, which process would you say? More importantly, which process do you think the people would say is fairer and represents a better way to govern? Number 13, was the Charlotte Ordinance unconstitutional or exceptional in nature and degree? No. 168-174, as enhanced by 168-4, made clear Charlotte's authority to do exactly what it said, and multiple courts in many other states have long held, and by that I mean for the last 70 years, that passing non-discrimination ordinances easily falls within the police power of municipalities, and that was the legal opinion handed out by the Charlotte lawyers to the Charlotte City Council and the municipal officials. And they were right. Number 14, does the LGBT provisions in House Bill 2 violate the Constitution of the United States? Very likely yes, and we'll find out very soon from the ACLU lawsuit in the Middle District as that case winds its way through. Number 15, have similar, indeed less egregious laws been recently vetoed in other states by other governors? Yes, South Dakota, as I mentioned, and not for nothing just yesterday, by the Republican governor of Georgia, who did the same thing. And both the Republican governor of South Dakota and the Republican governor of Georgia showed great intelligence and courage in their veto messages. I leave it to the public to decide whether that same set of traits existed in North Carolina last week. Number 16, why does North Carolina need any state law protecting from employment discrimination when aggrieved workers can simply sue under federal law, particularly Title VII? Well, the easiest answer without getting into the weeds is this. A plaintiff, a citizen of the United States, can sue in federal court for race or sex discrimination in employment in 50 states. But 48 of them thought it was also important to create a public policy and a right to sue for a violation of that policy in their states as a matter of moral and social and economic justice, and to signal their citizens the importance of tolerance and diversity and non-discrimination in their states. You would think the importance of that law under North Carolina policy would be obvious to any public official and any citizen of this state in the year 2016. Number 17. Does this bill allow bullying of transgender children specifically, or LGBT children generally, in school? No, not explicitly. But think of the signals it sends to both the oppressed and the oppressor. Remember that the people who brought you House Bill 2 are the same people who fought the School Violence Protection Act and its anti-bullying provisions several years ago solely because it enumerated policies to protect gay children. And they voted against that bill unanimously on a party line vote. Finally, number 18. What is the relationship between the provisions of House Bill 2 eliminating any state law protection for race or sex discrimination in North Carolina in the workplace and the Charlotte Ordinance? None. I now turn the speaker podium over or back to Rob to introduce our next guest.
As I call Mayor Roberts forward, I just wanted to read one little bit of news that most of you probably ought to read on your phone, that today, calling North Carolina's new anti-discrimination measure a national embarrassment. Attorney General Roy Cooper said that he would not defend, his office would not defend the law in any court challenge. He said it was blatantly unconstitutional. With that, thank you, Mayor Roberts. We're anxious to hear your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, according to the North Carolina GOP and several originators of emails and quite a few internet trolls, I'm the reason we're all here today. According to all of them, I started all this, and so I humbly come before you as someone who lives in a community that wants to do the right thing and wants to be inclusive and accepting, and never figured that it would be the middle of the storm that we are in the middle of. But I come to you humbly to say I appreciate all the support that I have gotten, in spite of all the other nasty emails as well. The support has been tremendous and has been overwhelming, has been national and international. And there are people who recognize that Charlotte did the right thing and that discrimination is not right and that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect. And we hope and we hope that cooler heads will prevail and that the pendulum will swing and that people will recognize that justice is not just for some people, it's for everyone. This ordinance and the reaction, all this, has a great bit of history in Charlotte, and it's so interesting to us to see the extent of the reaction in terms of sweeping away all that had gone before in any city in North Carolina, in any community, because we had this ordinance on our books since 1968. We had this same ordinance with the same wording, missing about 8 words, but protecting people against discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, color, and sex, and one more thing. The normal group of things that back in the 60s people understood were important to make sure that people were not discriminating, that everyone deserved access. So our local government clearly for decades has had that opportunity, has had that ability for people to bring suit, to bring their grievance at a local level against discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, and those accepted, the ones that are now in HB2. They've been there in Charlotte at a local level. The other difference between bringing something at a local level versus a federal level is that it is, if you are only using federal recourse for discrimination, it is more expensive. It takes a lot more time. It is not easily accessible to people who have modest incomes, and the time frame you had to sue was much shorter. And so we felt it's important in Charlotte, starting in 1968, to have local recourse for discrimination. What we did in our ordinance, but by the way, not only was there a public debate and hundreds of speakers and numerous hours of testimony and many months and community forums, by the way, because we had our religious organizations, we had Mecklenburg Ministries doing forums, we had our Community Relations Committee doing forums. We had forums. We also had, by the way, a campaign season in which every single forum, I think I went to about 25 of them, we were asked, would you support a non-discrimination ordinance, including the LGBT community? And all the candidates who won, with a few exceptions who weren't opposed, but the people who were in those races said that they would support it. This was all open conversation, recorded in the media. Clearly, people in Charlotte are in support of including the LGBT community, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And so what our ordinance did was add a few things to the ordinance we had in the books for decades. And we added sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and familial status. That's all we did was add those words. And we didn't say biological sex either, we said sex. So it's interesting to see the reaction. And we understand, our ordinance also had 3 parts. It had contracting, passenger vehicles for hire, and public accommodations. So the word bathroom is nowhere in the ordinance. Never said anything about bathrooms in the ordinance, in the wording. But the opponents took public accommodations and figured, okay, that does include restrooms, and used that one piece to mount a campaign against what we had done. Now, it's pretty clear from what happened that if that were the only thing that was bothering people, could have been a much different law in response. So that was the hook for people who truly wanted to discriminate against LGBT clients, vendors, citizens, hotel, whatever. And we actually had a conversation with the LGBT community in Charlotte about discrimination and said, tell us your stories. Tell us what you see happening. And there were incidents of a couple being refused a hotel room 3 times, of people being, well, lots of bullying, lots of slander, lots of aggression, many instances of name calling, of poor service, of refusal of even contracts, business contracts that were signed, et cetera, by phone, and the person and the couple comes up to get their service, and they see it's a gay couple, and the business owner said, I don't think so. So there were incidents of this happening. Charlotte felt it was very important to give people recourse, to give people a voice, to at least be heard before the community when these incidents occurred. And many people do not report these incidents. Many people we have many different views in our community, and some people do not feel that they have the support to bring these cases forward. This ordinance was Charlotte's way of saying, we support you, we support your right to be heard. We have heard there is discrimination and isolated incidents. We don't think that's right. We know it's not good for business. And we also know it is not the way that you compete in the 21st century in a global community. And when you look at the top 20 cities in America, there are only 3 of these cities who don't, there were only 2, now there are 3 again, because we dropped out. There are only 3 who don't have these protections. Jacksonville, which has had it brought forward and had it taken away like 2 times. They're trying to bring this ordinance forward, and they've had opposition. They're trying. Houston, which had the ordinance, and then the state government came in and said you got to have a referendum, and that was overturned. And Charlotte. We are the only 3 cities in the top 20 cities in America who don't believe our LGBT community has a right to not be discriminated against and a right to bring that recourse at the local level. And if you heard the other cities, even some smaller cities that are in very red states who have had these protections in place, over 200 in our country. Charlotte is a growing city. Charlotte is a progressive city. Charlotte wants to be among those cities that compete on a global basis and that recognize that talent and innovation is something we want to attract, and that comes in all shapes and forms. And we want that diversity. We are trying to attract that diversity. We are trying to be a great place to live and work and to be treated equally. And that was what this ordinance was all about. That it was not about bathrooms. It was nothing to do. I mean, but the other side did a great job of messaging around that one thing. And you saw the Twitter sphere and the Facebook and all the just huge outcry against one aspect. But it is about so much more. And I was very surprised, our council was very surprised to see the reaction to see what that bill actually looked like. We did not see it until 10 a.m. the day it was passed. Nobody saw it. I've been in conversation with legislators, as my colleagues had. We heard they might try to take out the bathroom part. We heard a few people say they might try to take out the whole ordinance. But we didn't hear people talking about taking out any city's right to have any ordinance whatsoever. And where did this minimum wage thing come in? I mean, it's like, whoa, total surprise on that. There has been a lot of national conversation about minimum wage. We know that it's not keeping pace with inflation. We know that there are workers who struggle with 2 jobs even to like pay the rent. We know all that, but how that entered into this bill, is still a mystery. So we are working now to try to figure out what happens next. We still have attorneys in our school system. I know the university system has attorneys looking at this, trying to figure out how do we comply, we have operated, by the way, our arena where the NBA plays, our convention center, we have operated our facilities owned by the city of Charlotte in a non-discriminatory way, letting people who are transgender use the restroom they identify with. We have been doing that for years. For years. Our own facilities that we built and constructed and that we operate and we police and we patrol and all that, we have been operating that way for years. And people know that. Now we've got to figure out, do we have to change the way we operate our own buildings? And that question hasn't really been answered because there's an ambiguity in some of the phrasing. And I'm not an attorney. I'm married to one, which is a good thing. I tell him every day, I appreciate you so much, so much. We love lawyers because lawyers help ensure that we have a country that is fair and equal. Thank goodness we have recourse. I've lived in the third world. I have lived in the Dominican Republic, and I know what it's like to be in a system where laws don't matter, where influence and money and corruption do matter. And every time you spend time in that kind of country, you thank God for America. Absolutely. But it also takes our voices. It also takes the public weighing in and bringing attention to the challenges we have.
That's right.
That's exactly right. So we are in the process of figuring out what we do next. We're having a meeting tomorrow with our business leaders, city, county, our tourism authority, our Convention of Visitors Bureau. We're going to have a meeting about how do we, within the constraints of this new law that's being challenged, but we've got to right now, we've got to figure out how we operate within the law. How do we continue to attract conventions? We've already had a few, and our Convention of Visitors Bureau won't say who, but we had a few say, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to go somewhere else. We know of at least one movie company that took its production from Charlotte to Canada. I know because a friend of mine said, who works with the film industry, said that she had to cancel hundreds of hotel rooms at the last minute because the film crew all left. So we know this fallout's already happening. And we are desperately trying as Charlotte to say, and in our cities, I have talked to mayors in other of North Carolina cities, small and large. And the idea of taking away local control to the extent that they did is counter to everything that we believe in when we know that we're not a one-size-fits-all state, that there are certain things the state can control from a perspective of the whole state. There are other things that are very different, community to community, and local governments should be allowed to solve those challenges at the local level on many, many different things. And our state has been eroding those powers to the detriment of our competitiveness, to the detriment of our fairness, to the detriment of our future. And so we've heard from cities around the state, I've heard from cities around the country who recognize that Charlotte did the right thing and that we want people to know Charlotte will continue to do the right thing and to be equal and inclusive, but we have to operate within state law. And we're going to have a lot of conversations in our community about what that means, how far does that go, and how do we stay true to the values we know that we have. And we know that most people in the state have. And there are even some people who bought the whole bathroom argument, who once you explain it to them are like, oh, well, that's no big deal. They just have never met a transgender person and have never had. And what I have been telling too, which is terrific, and I have heard people speak with passion, everybody that's transgender, I have said, please tell your story. I know it's hard. I know it's a journey, but you've got to tell the story of your journey, because until you do, people won't recognize that there are people who work with them, who are in their neighborhood, who are transgender, and they probably never knew and never thought about it. And all of a sudden, one group with really smart, fearful messaging has made them the boogeyman. And that just isn't right. It violates every human rights precept that we all believe in. And those of you who have children in college, some of you may still be in college. You know what our young people are telling us. They have friends who are agender, who are gender fluid, who are transgender. We have great, you know what's interesting? The companies we heard from first, like PayPal, they're technology companies, because we want creative people. We want people who aren't constrained by thinking inside the box, who are going to figure out solutions to complex 21st century problems. So why would we tamp down that creativity by telling people they have to fit in a certain gender box? So we're going to continue to work in Charlotte. We look forward to partnering with whoever who wants to help us educate the community, who wants to help us talk about these challenging issues, and who wants to help support the vision of a future North Carolina that is welcoming, that is inclusive, that brings talent here from all over the world and accepts people as people, and people who are willing to be part of our community and to contribute to our future. And I look forward to working with all of you to do that as we go ahead. And I want to thank the folks from Charlotte who came here too. Yay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
As I call Chris Brook forward, Chris is, as I said, legal director with the ACLU of North Carolina. Chris has got to do a media call in about 10 minutes, right, Chris? So we're going to let him.
Something like that. So I'm going to
With
run through
national
things.
media, so we'll let him go for it.
But I want to start where Mayor Roberts left off, which is the ACLU and Equality NC are named plaintiffs in the lawsuit that we filed yesterday morning. That's our job. It's easy for us to do it. It's not easy for Joaquin and the other plaintiffs that we represent to stand up and tell their stories. So we really owe Joaquin another round of applause. And support for being willing to stand up in the face of what the legislature has done to our state and to our LGBT community and say, this is not right, and I want to tell my story, and I want to tell how HB2 is entirely incompatible with wanting to live my life and go about my business here in North Carolina. I want to start with a little process vignette to compare our governor to the governor of South Dakota in regards to the HB2 process. When a similar, albeit much narrower bill was under consideration in South Dakota, folks up there reached out to the governor of South Dakota and encouraged him to meet with transgender youth in the state and hear their stories and hear how the proposed legislation would impact their community. And he did so. He sat down, spoke with them, learned from them, and then vetoed the legislation. We extended the exact same opportunity to Governor McCrory last Wednesday. Still haven't heard back from him. I mean, what a disastrous example of lack of leadership. And we see that continuing to bounce this week. When you introduce a bill and make it the law of North Carolina, in less than 12 hours, you do not know what you are signing in a meaningful way. And you do not know the consequences that it's going to have throughout the state. We saw that yesterday with Governor McCrory lecturing the media about how they're making a big deal out of nothing. And they said, well, you know, what about these non-discrimination ordinances that had been adopted in Raleigh and in Greensboro? You know, we know about the impact of the Charlotte ordinance, but those ordinances had already been in effect. And he said, you know, you're blindsiding me. I've been traveling all day. So he apparently does not have an iPhone. He certainly doesn't have a legal staff looking at the impacts here. And I've been hearing, and we've been hearing all week from county and municipal attorneys as well as school board attorneys trying to get a grip on what sort of impact this is going to have on their non-discrimination provisions. This is what happens when you rush through legislation. So why did we move so quickly? We moved so quickly very plainly because HB 2 is having a negative impact on the LGBT community now. We were contacted by dozens of impacted parties immediately upon passage, talking and telling their stories to us about how this was going to impact their day-to-day lives. And I want to tell sort of the two different stories that we're telling through the complaint in a very short form. Joaquin, as was referenced, is an employee at UNC. HB 2 essentially leaves him without a restroom that he can use while at work on campus. Cannot do his job. Same situation with Peyton, the UNCG student that we represent. He's supposed to go on and off of campus every time they need to use the restroom. I mean, this is, you know, not only materially impactful and really disruptive to their day-to-day life, it's humiliating to be told by the state of North Carolina that that is somehow necessary due to some invented fear. And, you know, I think, you know, we sued both on 14th Amendment equal protection and due process grounds, alleging sex and sexual orientation discrimination. We also sued on Title IX grounds because Title IX prohibits sex discrimination, and that's been interpreted to include gender identity and gender expression. You're going to hear from folks over the legislature, as well as Governor McCrory, that, you know, people can just change their birth certificate and therefore use the bathroom that accords with their gender identity and gender expression. A lot of people don't have the resources financially to do that. A lot of people don't know that they have to do that in the transgender community. And also, there are people who live in North Carolina who cannot do that. If you're born in Tennessee, you cannot change the gender marker on your birth certificate, period. So you are being written out of existence, I suppose, by House Bill 2. So that's one set of claims. Another set of claims is challenging the massive preemption of both provisions that were already in place as well as future provisions to protect the LGBT community. And we tell the story of Angela Gilmore, who's a professor at NC Central School of Law, who talks about being a visiting professor at Elon Law and, you know, thinking she would never want to leave Florida, and then feeling how welcomed she felt living in the Triangle and living in Durham. And talking about how it felt to have this bill passed through and the LGBT community vilified by the legislature repeatedly with mythology and nonsense about threats that do not pose. And that feeling of welcome being stripped away, but also her ability to advocate in Durham or Durham County for further political change. Her ability to feel comfortable when she goes with her wife to Charlotte to stay in a hotel there because those public accommodations provisions are now gone, taken away in less than 12 hours. So, you know, this echoes very much Romer versus Evans for the lawyers in the room, which is in Colorado, the state decided that they were going to preempt cities like Boulder that had adopted provisions protecting the LGBT community. And, you know, one of the things that's frustrating is Romer was decided by the Supreme Court, and the state action in Colorado was struck down in 1996. So we're 20 years later, revisiting the same dark well of bigotry here in North Carolina. And, you know, reading back through the Romer case over the last couple days as we got ready to file, one line stuck with all of us as we considered the impact of HB2, and that was Justice Kennedy writing, "A state cannot so deem a class of persons a stranger to its laws." That's exactly what our legislature and our governor did last week, is they tried to ignore the fact and write transgender people out of our state and tried to ignore the impacts that this was going to have on the broader LGBT community. So it's a real pleasure to be able to represent Joaquin, Peyton, and Angela. And enough of me talking. Let's hear from one of the brave plaintiffs who was willing to stand up and push back against what happened. So thank you all for having me.
Joaquin Carcano, come speak, come talk to us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As I said, I'm Joaquin Carcano. I am the lead plaintiff in this case, and I am a UNC employee, and I'm also a Latino trans man. I've been working at UNC for close to 4 years, so this has been a very big change in my life as an employee of UNC, where I've been very used to, you know, my environment there, the people that support me, and what I have to do about, you know, my work life there. So I've been asked many times in the past few days, you know, why am I involved in this? And I think it's really simple. I'm personally affected. This is a very direct attack on the LGBT community, the trans community, who are especially marginalized. And in regard to the work I do at UNC, my work is specifically with the Latino trans community, and trans women specifically. So this law affects me, it affects my community in terms of my colleagues outside of UNC, my trans women colleagues, our clients. You know, these are my friends, my family, this is my chosen family, and this affects all of us. Not only has sort of our daily lives been interrupted, but, you know, the violence against us has been heightened, you know, with the sort of state-sanctioned violence that this legislation enables. You know, a lot of the clients I work with and the colleagues outside of UNC that I work with are not from the US. They came here, and a lot of them have been granted asylum, or have been in the process of being granted asylum. They came here to find safe spaces. They faced a lot of violence back home, and now they're here. They've made a home in North Carolina. Many of them have been here for over 10 years, and now they are facing a huge backlash against a community that they had come to find as their own. And, the mayor sort of talked about your own story, and so I'll give you a couple of examples about, you know, my own personal story in terms of how this affects me. In terms of birth certificates, so yes, they put this out as a very simple answer, like, oh, just get your birth certificate changed. It's a very complicated process. It usually requires medical transition, which is not something everyone wants to undergo. It's not part of everyone's process. And also, it's very expensive if someone chooses to go that route. My insurance does not cover any transgender procedures, no trans health, you know, my primary care provider, my hormones, anything like that. Nothing is covered. It's completely out of pocket. So I am interested in part of my own process is I want to get a hysterectomy. You know, to get a hysterectomy, my gender marker needs to be female to have any sort of hope to get medically reimbursed for a very expensive procedure. And so I cannot just go in and change my gender marker. That's a very complicated process. I do not know how long it'll take for me to even start the medical process to get a hysterectomy. It's something I'm working on in my personal life. There's no timeline, but I need to be marked as female on my birth certificate. So that is something I cannot change at this point to sort of bend to this legislation's will. Also in terms of violence, you know, people think, you know, I've heard or seen online, you know, what's the big deal about a restroom? Just go to the other restroom. That is not my place. That is not where I belong. That's not, you know, where I feel comfortable. I use the men's room exclusively. I do not want to make other people feel uncomfortable being a man in a woman's restroom. And also, it's already a place of inherent privacy and vulnerability than to sort of have this legislation sort of put this on people's radars. There might be people that are not supposed to be in there, so be on alert. I travel a lot for work. I work in Charlotte a few times a month because I work with a HIV case management agency down there, Regional AIDS Interfaith Network, or RAIN. So I work in Charlotte, so I drive often. I work in Raleigh, Durham, Benson, Siler City. I also travel to DC. So I'm traveling a lot through rural areas in the state. I have a really wonderful, supportive partner who also is very aware of sort of the struggles that the trans community has to go through in terms of interacting in public spaces where it's not always very friendly. So when I'm in rural areas and I have to stop for gas or I have to go to the restroom, my girlfriend always insists that she's on the phone with me because she's scared that I go into the restroom. If someone is sort of tipped off that they believe I don't belong in a place I'm not supposed to, she uses the phone as a protective measure, as a shield against that violence. So I'm on the phone when I stop at these rural gas stations, when I'm pumping gas, when I'm going to the restroom, for her sake and for my own. But those are the types of measures we have to take, and that's when I go to the men's restroom, But now with this legislation, there's sort of a target on us now. Oh, people be on alert. People are going to be trying to use, even though this legislation affects, state employees and state sort of offices, public areas are, those people who are not friendly to us are on alert. And they're going to be trying to sort of assert themselves against us because they feel that they've been encouraged to by this legislation. It's an outright, sort of violent, push, to enact this against us. So that's sort of a piece of, what I go through in my own daily life. Let's see. But yeah, I think it's very important to talk about that. This is about protection and safety for us. And with this bill, there's been a big claim that it's about protecting, women and children. But that fails to recognize trans women and trans youth who are women and children. What about their safety? We are already marginalized groups, and then you're putting this hate on us. And we are residents of North Carolina. We live here. This is our home, and it is the governor's obligation to protect his constituents, and that is who we are. And this fails to do that. Yeah, we're not asking for special treatment. I've also heard that a lot is, why do you need special measures? Why do you need special treatment? And the same argument was made for marriage equality. Why can't you just be happy with, what's it called? I forget the, sort of civil union. Why can't, I heard that a lot. Why can't you be happy with the civil union? Why can't you be happy with that? Why isn't that good enough? Again, there's this second-class citizen treatment, and it's being, used against us in this sense again. So no, we won't be happy using a different restroom. No, we won't be happy when we face, threats out in public spaces. Where was I going with that? But yeah, so, but I think that, sorry, I get a little lost in my thoughts, and I'm very nervous. Thank you. Let's see where they're going. Yeah, we're not asking for special treatment. We're asking to be treated like everyone else, to have a right to use the restroom that aligns with our own gender identity. We're not going back and forth. We're not saying, oh, this day, this one, and this one, another one. That is this sort of belief that, no, this is a static thing for us. This is where we believe we belong. It is where we belong. And so we feel that this is not special treatment. We just want access like everybody else in the state. Let's see. Where's it going? Let's see. Sorry. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Thank you. But I guess the last point I want to make also is, again, there's a talk of, men being in women's restrooms and vice versa, and there have been a lot of sort of ads put out that sort of on behalf of trans people too that say, do I belong in a women's restroom with a bearded man or the opposite, and it's not about that. It shouldn't even come down to that sort of media tactic or sort of pull to sort of get compassion from the larger community. it's really about, respecting us as individuals, respecting our physical bodies. Now it's sort of our physical bodies are under attack. Our physical bodies are under the public eye. No one gets to say what is beyond these clothes. This is a private thing, and it's frankly, unjust. It's very invasive, and it's really not fair. And I think on behalf of the trans community, we are very diverse, and we feel like we can offer other people the same compassion that we allow everyone else outside of the trans community their right to their own unique identity, how you want to dress, how you want to have your hair, things like that. And all we're asking for is the same compassion to our own identity. But that's sort of it.
Thank you, Joaquin. As I call up our last speaker, Tim Gaudette, I'll mention that if you want to see heartening editorials today, check out both the Greensboro News and Record and Winston-Salem Journal, who have both called on the legislature and Governor McCrory to reconvene and repeal the law already this morning. So, Tim, you're batting cleanup.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you guys very much for having me. I'm very proud to be here. My name is Tim Gaudette, and I'm an outreach manager with a national small business advocacy group called Small Business Majority. I'd like to thank the ACLU, Mayor Roberts, Joaquin, for being here, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending as well. If I may ask, to get more familiar with the room, how many people here are small business owners? Great. How many people know small business owners? Okay. How many people are working with business groups as well? Super. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. So if you might allow me a few minutes to introduce my organization a little further, and then I'm going to go into some of our work product around non-discrimination as a business policy. So Small Business Majority was founded and is run by small business owners trying to solve America's biggest business problems facing the 28 million small businesses out there. Since 2005, we've been actively engaging entrepreneurs and policymakers in support of solutions that promote small business growth and drive a strong economy. The key to our success is that we translate public policy issues, which can be very challenging for small business owners, for the small business community, for the public, and often for our leaders and representatives. We maintain our small business voice and emphasize small business rationales for the solutions we recommend. Our work makes a difference, we believe, in the public debate, as small businesses now employ about half of the private workforce and have created over 63% of the new jobs over the last several decades. What that means is half of the private workers take home a paycheck from a small business. Entrepreneurs have an iconic voice within the electorate, ranking at the top of the list of the most trusted and respected groups in our country. How many people can think of a mom and pop Main Street business? I joke that we had to have an extra table today because small business is now at the table. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that business isn't one voice per se anymore. There are distinct differences between small business and large businesses' points of view, and that's okay. We can have that debate. What's really exciting about this is there is significant alignment that going forward, non-discrimination is the better policy. But we are a 501c3. I want to make sure everyone knows that. We are not a lobbyist group. We have offices all around the country. We have about 30-plus employees. And again, I thank you for allowing me to speak. And one of the things that we would like to tell you is through 10 years of significant research, mostly through scientific, independent, randomly sampled surveys of small businesses, nationally but also state-based work, is that small businesses, time after time, issue after issue, and we are multiple issues, anywhere from healthcare to tax and budget to access to capital. Small businesses come back as a very practical and pragmatic group, not the staunch ideological, I'll show my age a little bit, Archie Bunker mentality that sometimes the characterization has been. And that's exciting work. We really like to get that message out. So I appreciate, again, your time on this. So after the Supreme Court decision last year allowing civil marriage for all, there was an expected reaction. And we did some major polling around the country. 2/3 of small business owners show that owners should not be able to deny goods or services to someone who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender based on the owner's religious beliefs. And we understand many people in America live a faith-based life, but 55% of small business owners believe that a business owner should not be allowed to deny wedding-related services based on religious beliefs to a same-sex couple as well. 8 in 10 entrepreneurs last summer told us that a federal law, I know we're talking about North Carolina, but a federal law to protect LGBT individuals against discrimination in public accommodations such as restaurants, hotels, and other businesses that are open to public. 8 out of 10. So basically they're telling us that this is bad for small business, it's bad for the economy nationally and for the state, and it's just bad policy. However, we'll go back a little farther, and I actually have some North Carolina data. From the summer of 2013, when again we also had a major change in some laws, 65% of North Carolina entrepreneurs believe federal law, again before this activity, should prohibit discrimination in employment against gay and transgender people, and 67% of North Carolina small business owners believe that the state should have a law supporting this type of protections. A sweeping 74% did not realize it's currently legal under federal law to fire or refuse to hire someone because they're LGBT. And 64% were unaware that it was legal in North Carolina to refuse that same offer of a job. 6 in 10 North Carolina small businesses believe that laws to protect against discrimination can improve their bottom line, the business case for this, and that these kinds of laws help employers attract the best and brightest employees, regardless of whether an employee is gay, straight, or whatever. Additionally, North Carolina entrepreneurs believe that implementing a non-discrimination policy is the right thing to do. Of the employers who have a non-discrimination policy, 92% believe it's there so that all employees should be treated the same, fairly and equally. And 81% said it was because it's the right thing to do. Often we hear from small business owners that customer demand is still perhaps a struggle. Finding the right person, they find a lot of people still, for jobs, but finding that right person is still a challenge. So business is often described as a competition. So big picture, why would the state of North Carolina want to put itself at a competitive disadvantage? When I know, coming from Denver, Colorado, we look at the areas around the southeast as our competitors. We have changed over the last several years, decades. It's gone pretty fast actually living there. We're booming. I'd hate to see the cranes and the construction stop. Those are some of the things you have to think about. When big business says they might leave, well, guess what? That's not just the big businesses. Who supports them? Who goes and does the cleaning at night? Who supplies the catering? Who drives? Look at our Uber and Lyft economy. Those are all at risk. I'm not saying it's going to happen, not saying it's the doom and gloom, but Georgia just was faced with this. $2 billion estimate in the first year of that law passed. That's damaging, and that goes across all politics. It goes across all religions. If you're in business, you're at risk. So we would say, let's have this discussion. I know it's not a great statement right now to say North Carolina's going to be better off after this discussion, I think. But it's a discussion that now is having to be had. We'd love to talk about it. We're going to be doing some education and outreach around this issue around the state. We'd love to have any participation or partners. And again, we've asked the questions, and small businesses come back dramatically saying non-discrimination is the better way to go. So I thank you for your time. I have handouts and research with me. If anyone's a data geek, I have a few copies of our research. And let me just finish that, change is hard. It's especially hard for small business. And we understand there's been a lot of change. But when you have resounding results, 2/3 of small businesses believe that non-discrimination is the way to go. I think there's a loud message there.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.